Hey there, this is Miss Wright, and I'm going to be going over the lesson today for converting decimals to fractions. So these are the two things you're going to need, your math notebook and this note sheet. So if you don't have that, go ahead and grab that right now. And the first thing that you're going to do is flip open to your table of contents, and we're going to take a look at our new learning goal for today. So if we zoom in here, we are on NS1A, which you'll notice is no longer a review. I can convert between decimals and fractions, and we're going to put this on page 5. So if you do not have a 5 there, go ahead and put that now. And then we're going to flip to our next blank page. So just keep flipping in your notebook. And we're actually going to flip until we have 2 pages open. So flip till you have both a left and a right side open, because we're going to use both of those for our notes today. So go ahead, and we always title the right hand side. So go ahead and title that Converting Decimals and Fractions. So that's our title. Again, that's on the right-hand side. And then we always number our pages, and we said this was page 5 up in the right-hand corner. So remember how I said you needed a blank open page, left and right. So we're actually going to start taking our notes on that left-hand side. So we're going to be over here to start our notes. So if you could go ahead and flip your notebook for now so that you're on that left page and you'll be ready to start. So our target is converting between decimals and fractions. So that means that we can convert fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. So I'm going to start by asking the question, and you can copy your notes just like mine. Can all fractions become decimals? And in math, we always want to ask that important question of why. Why is that? And the answer to that question is yes. And we always want to answer that why with a because. So we're going to prove it here. So when we have a fraction that we're trying to convert to a decimal, there's a simple thing that we do. So if we are going from fraction to a decimal, the easy thing that we do is divide. We divide the top, which is the numerator, by the bottom, which is the denominator. And we're going to do a couple examples here. So some of our examples will be fractions that turn decimals to terminate, which means they end. And some will have repeating. So some of these we can do fairly easy without a calculator, and some we will be using a calculator for. When you do the Kahoot today, if you have a calculator on your Chromebook, you can use that if you feel that you need to. So example number 1 is 9 100ths. 9 100ths. So if I take my calculator, divide the top by the bottom, 9 divided by 100 is 0.09. So we're simply going to write 0.09. Turn that into a decimal there. So now I'm going to ask, is that decimal terminating or is it repeating? And we call this terminating because it ends. So I'm just going to make a note here that this is terminating, which means it ends. It ends. So hopefully your notes are looking like mine here. And here goes number 2. 2 and 2/5. 2 and 2/5. So when we solve this, just like here, this was the ones place, that's where that 2 is going to go. 2 and, there's my decimal point, and we have 2/5. So if you do 2 divided by 5 in your calculator, you're going to get a 4 here, which is 4/10. 4/10. So 2 and 4/10 would be how we read that. And again, I'm going to ask, is this terminating or is this repeating? And this is, again, terminating. All right, on to number 3. Let's try a -1 here. So let's do -1 and 2/8. -1 and 2/8. So just like before, if I have a whole number, that's going to come before the decimal, and I'll put that negative sign out there. And then when I do 2 divided by 8, I end up with 0.25, which is read as 25 hundredths. So 2 and 25 hundredths. Or excuse me, 1, -1 and 25 hundredths. And again, this example is terminating. That decimal place ends. So now we're going to look at some that have a repeating decimal. So number 4 is -3/7. What does that equal? Well, we know it's going to be negative, and we know that it does not have any whole number, so we're going to have 0 point something. 0 and. So if I take, and I can ignore the negative for now because we've already taken care of it, and all I'm going to plug in my calculator is 3 divided by 7. And if we take a look at that number, I'm going to zoom in on it here, I see 428,571, and then I see 42, and now I see 9. So these numbers are starting to repeat, and the reason this is a 9 is because that 7 causes the, or that 5 causes the 8 to increase and round up. So this is a repeating decimal. Repeating decimal. So where we see that repeating is we have 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, 1. So all of these numbers are going to repeat over and over again. If there was infinite room on my calculator, so we draw a line over them, and we'll say that those are repeating. Those are repeating. So let's do one more example. Number 5, -4 and 3/13. -4 and 3/13. So I know this -4 is going to come before the decimal point. So that -4 comes before the decimal point. Zoom in there. -4 comes before the decimal point, and then I need to divide 3 by 13. And I end up with 230769231. So there again, we're seeing that 2, 3 starting to repeat again. So our answer is going to be -4 and 2.2307669, and then it repeats again. So we'll draw that line over and say that it is repeating. So the important thing to remember here is, can I turn any fraction into a decimal? And the answer is yes. All I have to do is divide. And I'm either going to end up with a terminating fraction, something, or a terminating decimal, something that ends, or I'm going to end up with one that is repeating. So this page is now complete, and we're going to flip to where you wrote the title page here in your notebook, the Converting Decimals to Fractions, and we are going to take some notes there. So just like we asked, can all fractions become decimals? I'm going to ask the opposite now, which is, can all decimals become fractions? So can all decimals become fractions? And then I'm going to ask my question of why. And we're not going to answer that yet today. We will get there, but we're not going to answer that yet today. This is where you need your place value chart. We're going to glue that into our notebook right there. So go ahead, grab your glue stick and put it in your notebook now. I'm going to glue mine in so that it's good to go. And if you need to pause the video while you glue yours, you need a little more time, feel free to do that. So mine is all glued in. And today we're going to talk about only decimals that terminate. We're only going to talk about decimals that terminate, which means that they end. So if I give you a decimal that ends, can we write that as a fraction? And I would hope that if you remember from what we just did, if I gave you this terminating decimal, would you be able to turn it into a fraction? And the answer is yes. If there is a terminating decimal, then we can turn that into a fraction. So down here in my notes, I'm going to write terminates, and we're going to do some examples with terminates. And I'm just going to put in parentheses that means end. The decimal terminates and ends. So there's a reason why I gave you this place value chart. So notice we have moving from the right to the left, we increase our whole numbers, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. But after this decimal point, and we read it as and, we're getting smaller, tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10,000s, and we could keep going. So I'm going to give you, for our first example, the decimal point of 0.1. So if I were to plug this into my place value chart here, I would have a 0 here, and I would have a 1 here. So if I were to say this verbally, how would I write that? Well, it ends in the tenths, so we would say 1/10. We would say 1/10 because it ends in that tenths place. Now, if it ended in the hundredths, then we would say hundredths. If it ended in the thousands, we would say thousands. So if that's how we say it, then how do we write it as a fraction? Well, hopefully saying it can help you think through that. 1/10, 1 out of 10. So it's simply like this, 1/10. So we say it 1/10 and we write it 1/10. So let's take a look at a second example. I'm going to give you 0.111. So again, if I were to look up in my place value charts, 0 and 111, I'm ending in the thousands. So I would say 111 thousandths. 111 thousandths. So how do I write that? Well, I have 111 over 1,000. 111 over 1,000. So last one, before I give you some to try on your own, number 3 is negative 2.05. Negative 2.05. So we say negative 2 and, because that gives us the decimal place, and we have 5 what? Well, if I put a 0 here and a 5 here, I'm ending in the hundredths. So I have 5 hundredths. And I forgot a D there, squeeze that in, hundredths. So when I write that, I would write my -2 and 5 over 100. And both of those, the 5 and the 100, is divisible by 5. So when I do that, I end up with -2 and 1/20. So don't forget to simplify. When we say it, if we get something that can be simplified, we need to do that. So now I want you to try these 3. And I'd like you to pause the video and try these 3 problems. So you try, and go ahead and write these down. 0.21, 1.075, and -2.35. So go ahead and pause the video now, and then once most people have finished, you can click play and we'll go over those. So hopefully you took a second to solve those. So when I put this into my chart, I would end in the hundredths. So I would have 21 hundredths. So that's how that would be written. The next one, I know I have a whole number. So I have 1. And if I read this, I end in the thousands. So I only have 75 over 1,000. And those are both divisible by 5. If I divide them by 5, I would end up with 1 and 15/20. And again, those are both divisible by 5. So my final answer should be 1 and 3/40. 1 and 3/40. And this last one, I'm going to have my -2, and then a 3 and a 5 would end in the hundredths. So I have 35 100ths. And those, again, are also both divisible by 5. So our final answer is -2 and 7/20. -2 and 7/20. So hopefully your notes should look like mine. We will continue these notes later this week to be able to answer that question of, can all decimals become fractions and why? So right now we've only looked at the examples if they terminate. So all of these decimals here, they're terminating. So if it terminates, yes, you can turn that in. But are there decimals that are not terminating, is my question to you. So take this knowledge with you into our activity that we are going to be completing today. See you soon. Keep up the great work. Bye.